Good morning to everybody. It's today just before Thursday. It's been a hard week actually for the Kehillah. First of all, Joe Menashe has passed away, Zichron Bracha, and today it's going to be the funeral of Ma'at of a newcomer to the shul who made an impact on the shul, very colorful character, Moshe Neumann, Zichronam Libracha. We should nevertheless have a Chodesh Tov, a good month, a happy month, and that we should hear Besorot Tovot. Parshat Noach, the story about the great Mabul. The Gemara and the Midrashim, as well as the Torah, says that basically the reason for the Mabul, amongst all the other Chataim, the basic reason for the Mabul was that the violence which gripped society, that there was theft and robbery and mayhem, and that was the reason for the Mabul. It says, "Vatimalei haaretz chamas." The whole of the land was full of robbery and like a violent robbery. And that's what brought about the mamash, the destruction of the whole world. Besides other, the Torah also speaks about and hints at like the depravity of the time. But basically, lo nechtam gzeratam ela ala gezel. But the Torah says, nevertheless, like the final straw was because of the violence which gripped society. The question is now that, okay, there were many people who robbed, but there were also people who were the robbed. They were the victims. Not every single person was a robber. There was maybe, let's say, most of society were robbers. Most of society were people who stole. But it's very hard to believe that every single person was both a victim and a robber at the same time. So there must have been a certain amount of people who were victims, people who didn't have much strength, didn't have the political power to do certain things, didn't have a certain standing. So why is the whole world destroyed on the account of the robbers? But what about the victims who were also destroyed? So I'd like to share the way to get to this is through a midrash, but I'd like to get through an answer to this through a Gemara in Masechet Sukkah. The Gemara in Masechet Sukkah tells a story. First of all, let's give a little bit of a background. On Sukkot, one's not allowed to obviously steal in order to fulfill the mitzvot of Sukkah. The Gemara speaks about the sugya of mitzvah haba ba'avera. The person steals in order to do a mitzvah, so the mitzvah is not counted at all. That's the simple meaning of the sugya. We're not learning now Masechet Sukkah. So if a person would, let's say, steal someone's lulav, they would go into a field, they would pluck someone else's etrog without his permission and use it then, not to make jam, but they would use it then to make a brocha of the Daled Minim, to use it as part of the mitzvah of the Daled Minim of the Sukkot. So then that's considered to be mitzvah ba'avera. It's a mitzvah which came through an aveira, and therefore it doesn't. There's no value really to that mitzvah. Not only that, there's just the aveira. So that applies to that. It applies also to not only to the mitzvah of lulav, but also to the mitzvah of sukkah. If a person would go to someone's property, what they would do is they would cut down some trees, again without permission. They would use those trees for the schach. So then that sukkah is not kosher. So the Gemara then relates an incident. It's an incident about Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman was like the chief rabbi and the head of the exile, and his messengers, people from who worked for him, they went to a certain field, and what they did was, it's not clear exactly where they got it from, but they these branches, and what they did was they used it for the sukkah. So the owner of these planks or these branches, she was a lady, an elderly lady, and she came before the court and she said to Rav Nachman, you know what, your messengers, the people who work for you in the rabbinate, whatever, they stole from my branches, and you should know therefore that you and all the other disciples and rabbis, you're all sitting in a sukkah which is stolen. So he didn't really take notice of her. So what happened was that she then upped the criticism, and she said to him the following. She said, you know what, Abraham, she said, you know, my father who had 318 slaves, he is also protesting. We know that that's a reference to Abraham. Abraham Avinu, it says that when he went out to rescue Lot, what he did was he took with him 318 servants. So according to the Mefarshim, she was saying like this, she said to him, either you are not like Abraham Avinu, because Abraham Avinu was careful to see to it that both his servants and his animals, that they weren't guilty of any theft whatsoever. He would, for example, when the animals, camels, etc., went out to graze, so he would put muzzles on them so that they shouldn't go by the way and graze from other people's property. So Al Kol Panim, she hinted to him, well, you don't do like that. Or, according to another group of Mefarshim, she meant to hint and say to him, look, Avraham Avinu, he was a person who was so enamored, and he was so careful to do justice. He was prepared now to take 318 people and to go and rescue Lot from people who captured him. And you don't do the same thing. Your servants stole from me, and instead of now going out with courage and giving me back everything, so you don't do anything. Okay, so now the story continues, that she was shouting and screaming, and Rav Nachman, what he did was he continued to ignore her. And the reason that he ignored her was because she was asking now for her let's call it the branches back. And he was saying, we don't have to give you the branches back. But I'm not saying that they weren't stolen, but we have to return only the value and not the branches itself. So we'll give you the value of the wood and not the branches itself. The branches we want to continue to use in the sukkah. So he turned around and he said to her that to the people who were the Beit Din, just ignore at the moment. The only thing that she can claim is money, and she can't claim branches. Now, before we carry on, it'll be a little bit longer, okay? Just take in parenthesis, this story in the time of the Enlightenment, in inverted commas, Katz was a very a big anti-religious historian. So he used the story in order to convey that the rabbis, they only care for themselves. And here was an elderly lady, and she was shouting that she wanted she doesn't want money, she wants her branches back. And the rabbis dealt with her very cruelly. They didn't take notice of her claims, and they said, you know what, we'll give her the money, but the branches we'll continue using till Sukkot. So this is what he and others published in order to. That's one of the texts that they had on the Talmud, etc. But the truth is that anyone who knows the sugya from the inside, that it's exactly the opposite, because in the halakha is like this: if a person claims that he wants the original article which was stolen during Sukkot, so then what he does is, if he's claiming that during Sukkot, so he cannot get the branches back. The only thing that he can get back is the money. But if he claims the branches that were stolen after Sukkot, then the halakha the halacha obligates the people who took the branches unwillfully, that they have to be returned as is, that you cannot get the value. So that's what Rav Nachman was trying to do. Since that she didn't want money and she wanted dafka the wood, so if she would have, Rav Nachman would have heard her claim. So then the halacha is that during Sukkot he would have had to give her money. But because now, in order that she insisted on the branches, so Rav Nachman ignored her, so that after Sukkot, she would come again, claim from the courts, and then she would get the actual wood back. Okay, so let's close now the inyan. But what does this story teach us? The story, amongst other things, the story tells us that there is a limit to how a person can protest. There's a limit on we have to protest, but like Shakespeare said, the lady doth protest too loud. It's too loud. And that also is a form of violence. For a person to say to Rav Nachman, you know what, you are not like Abraham Avinu. He went out to save his nephew from storm, and you, like a person who's accomplice to theft. So that is a form of violence. That's a violent way of talking. And the Midrash, this Gemara in Masechet Sukkah, ties up with what the Midrash, that the Midrash says, it answers our original question. We asked, there were people who were the culprits and there were people who were the victims. So why did the victims die? And the Midrash answers, because they protested too much. When they said, when things were wrong, they had every single right and every single obligation to bring their case before the Beit Din, whatever Beit Din there was. They had to protest, they had to fight, they had to cry, but they exaggerated, and the exact exaggeration was so terrible that was a form of violence itself. And you can see that in the world today. Let's go from the extreme to something which is more benign. But when the PLO, Yamach Shmo, when they come and say that, for example, nothing less, that Israel is engaged in ethnic cleansing, and the world hears this, and every single person who in the world, in the United Nations, has said that there isn't such a thing as ethnic cleansing. There, you can say that the Jewish people, Khalila, that they're cruel on the Palestinians. You can say they make it hard but are there gas chambers in Israel? Do we ethnically cleanse the Arabs? Do the Arabs not now sit in the parliament and much more? Do the Arabs not over here work, etc.? And even the people in Ramallah, do they not people who've got permits to come in? And do we go out and ethnically cleanse them? And for the world to hear this type of speech and to keep quiet, that is the biggest amount of, not the biggest, but that is violence, no less than a person stealing something. It's an absolute attack, a violent, disgusting attack on the Jewish people. And that's what happened in the time of Dora Mabu. Let's leave from the enemies, because it's always easier to attack the enemies. Right? But the thing is always to confront ourselves. And when we look at, for example, the way for non-stop, the way, for example, the opposition and others, they attack Netanyahu. Netanyahu is the devil, Netanyahu is a Satan. No matter what he did, right? He was the great evil. That is a violence. That's a violence of speech, which is just as bad as a person attacking someone, the non-stop protests and the things that they called him. Same thing is happening in certain circles with Bennett today. But that is what we're speaking about. Now let's take it one step further. When a person, like let's say, I always give the example, these examples about there are many things that, let's say, that between our colleagues that we don't do properly. So they've got a right. They've got a right to call us names. They've got a right to say things. And we sometimes, when they've done wronged us, but there's a limit on how loud we say and what we say. And for example, now let's bring it to the community. when certain things happen in the community, either I've made a mistake, the Gaboim made a mistake, this one's made a mistake, the chairman's made a mistake, whatever it is, and people, for the slightest thing, what they do is they say that's it, they're leaving the shul, or what they do is that they are going now for the next 6 months to another shul. There's not a problem to go to another shul if that's what if that makes one feels better and you can daven better. So say that. But to go and to protest in that way, that's violence. You know, if a person did something a little bit wrong, but for that you storm out, right, for a couple of weeks, that is much violent behavior. Right? You can come out, you can criticize, but the extreme of that type of conduct shows that that's not menschlichkeit. That's pashut. That's not being a ben adam. That's not being decent. That's not being a gentleman. Right. So that's what we come back to our question. Our question was, but the whole of the world was destroyed because of violence. And what about the victims? But that's what we're saying. The whole society was full of violence. The people who perpetrated the crime, the people who protested against the crime, the person which would steal an apple, you would think like he stole a car. Every single thing got blown up so beyond proportion to give people guilt content, to sit in the whole of the society was so violent. That's what one of the lessons that we learned, that yes, to protest and to protest properly and vigorously, but to know that even when it comes to protest and to speaking out against people who have wronged us, but not to do it in such a violent way. So Shabbat Shalom to everybody and a Chodesh Tov. And as I started off in the comments, we should be zocher to Chodesh Tov and Besorot Tovot.